The blood-red sun dipped below the jagged horizon as Willow Anderson stood at the freshly dug graves, her trembling fingers clutching a handkerchief soaked with tears that no longer came. 3 wooden crosses marked where her entire world now lay buried. Her husband of 5 years, their 3-year-old son, and the baby daughter she'd birthed just 6 months prior. The typhoid had swept through their homestead with merciless efficiency, leaving her alone in a world that suddenly held no meaning. Nevada Territory, 1872. Carlin was a small but growing settlement, the Transcontinental Railroad having breathed life into what was once merely a watering stop. But as the town flourished, Willow's world had collapsed. At 23, she had already experienced more love and loss than most would in a lifetime. The small cabin she and Thomas had built with their own hands now stood empty, haunted by echoes of children's laughter and the memory of a husband's gentle touch. Miss Anderson, the undertaker, Mr. Holloway, approached cautiously. "I'm mighty sorry, but it's getting dark. You shouldn't be out here alone." Willow didn't turn to face him, her eyes fixed on the 3 mounds of earth. "What difference does it make now?" Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears, hollow and distant. "There's nothing left for me. At least come back to town. Reverend Potter's wife has prepared a room for you." She nodded mechanically, not because she cared about shelter or her own safety, but because standing here any longer would change nothing. The dead would remain dead. Her family was gone forever. The following days passed in a fog of grief. Willow moved through them like a ghost, accepting the town's condolences with vacant eyes and forced gratitude. The women brought food she couldn't eat. The men offered to tend to her livestock until she got back on her feet. But Willow had no intention of getting back on her feet. What was the point of standing when there was nowhere to go? A week after the funeral, she sold the livestock for far less than they were worth. The following day, she gave away most of their possessions to families in need. Her actions raised concerned whispers throughout town. "She's not right in the head with grief," Mrs. Potter confided to the general store owner. "Giving away everything like that, what will she live on?" Willow overheard but didn't care. Living wasn't her concern anymore. On a particularly gray morning, she packed a small bag with the few remaining items she couldn't bear to part with: Thomas's pocket watch, a lock of each child's hair, and the family Bible containing their names and birth dates. She left a note for the Potters, thanking them for their kindness but offering no explanation for her departure. The Nevada wilderness stretched before her as she walked away from Carlin. She had no destination, no plan beyond putting distance between herself and the graves that had swallowed her heart. The weather was turning colder as autumn settled over the high desert. Perhaps, she thought distantly, the elements would simply claim her and the pain would finally end. By nightfall, exhaustion overtook her. She hadn't eaten properly in days, and her body, still recovering from childbirth and grief, rebelled against the harsh treatment. Collapsing beneath a twisted juniper tree, Willow stared up at the star-filled sky, wondering which one Thomas might be looking down from if he was looking at all. "I'm coming," she whispered, closing her eyes as the cold began seeping into her bones. Morning brought not the peace of death, but the insistent prodding of something hard against her shoulder. Willow opened her eyes reluctantly to find herself looking up at a man on horseback, the tip of his boot gently nudging her. "You dead or just sleeping, madam?" His voice was deep, tinged with a slight drawl that marked him as not originally from these parts. "Disappointingly alive," Willow muttered, sitting up with effort. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing himself to be tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his well-worn Stetson. His face, partially obscured by several days' worth of beard, nevertheless showed concern in his deep-set eyes. "You're a good 10 miles from anywhere," he observed, crouching down to her level. "Not exactly a safe place for a lady to be taking a nap." "I wasn't napping," Willow replied flatly, understanding dawned in his expression. "I see." He studied her for a moment, taking in her fine but rumpled clothing, the wedding band still on her finger, and the small traveling bag beside her. "Whatever you're running from, dying out here won't solve it." "You don't know anything about me," she said, a flicker of anger providing momentary warmth. "Know enough to see you're in trouble." He straightened and offered his hand. "Name's Quentin Nash. I've got a camp set up about a half-mile from here. Least I can do is offer you some coffee and a proper fire before you continue your journey." Willow hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, to stay where she was and let fate take its course. But another part, a tiny spark that refused to be extinguished despite her best efforts, recognized the simple human kindness in his offer. "Willow Anderson," she said finally, taking his hand and allowing him to help her stand. Quentin's camp was simple but well organized, evidence of a man accustomed to life on the trail. A small fire crackled cheerfully, a coffee pot already heating on the stones surrounding it. A lean-to shelter had been constructed between two trees, and a sorrel mare grazed contentedly nearby, alongside Quentin's own sturdy black gelding. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to a flat rock near the fire. "You look like you could use some warming up." Willow didn't argue. The morning air was crisp, and her body felt stiff from sleeping on the cold ground. She watched silently as Quentin poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her, then busied himself with preparing a simple breakfast of bacon and hardtack. "You're not from around Carlin," she observed after taking a sip of the strong, bitter coffee. It was the first thing she'd tasted in days that seemed to cut through the numbness. "No, madam, just passing through, on my way to California with some horses." He nodded toward the sorrel mare. "Got a small herd about a mile upstream where the grazing's better. You're a horse trader, among other things." He flipped the bacon in the pan. "Used to wrangle for some of the big outfits in Texas. Decided I preferred working for myself." Willow nodded, not really caring about his life story but finding the sound of another human voice oddly comforting after days of silence punctuated only by her own thoughts. "Here." He handed her a plate with bacon and softened hardtack. "Eat something. Whatever you're planning to do, you'll need your strength." She stared at the food, her stomach simultaneously churning with hunger and revulsion. "I'm not planning anything." Quentin sat across from her, his own plate balanced on his knee. "Everyone's planning something, Mrs. Anderson. Even if it's just to give up." His direct words startled her. "My husband is dead," she said flatly. "Along with my children, there's nothing left to plan for." He met her gaze steadily. "I'm sorry for your loss, truly, but that doesn't change what I said." Anger flared within her. "What would you know about it? Have you buried your entire family, watched everything you love turn to dust?" "No," he admitted quietly. "Can't say that I have, but I've seen enough death to know it's rarely the end of the story for those left behind. It is for me." She set the untouched plate beside her. Quentin didn't press the issue. They finished their meal in silence, Willow eventually forcing herself to eat a few bites when her body's demands became too insistent to ignore. As the sun climbed higher, Quentin packed up his small camp with efficient movements. "I need to check on my horses," he said. "You're welcome to come along, or I can take you back to Carlin." "I'm not going back to Carlin," he studied her. "Then where are you going?" Willow looked away. "I don't know." After a long moment, Quentin sighed. "Come with me to check the herd. After that, if you still want to wander off into the wilderness, I won't stop you. but I'd be a poor excuse for a man if I left a lady alone out here with night coming on again." Too exhausted to argue, Willow gathered her small bag and followed him. They walked in silence, Quentin leading his gelding while the sorrel mare trailed behind. The terrain gradually changed as they moved away from the main trail, becoming more lush as they approached a small stream cutting through the otherwise arid landscape. When they crested a small rise, Willow saw the horses, about 20 of them, grazing peacefully in the sheltered valley. They were magnificent animals, clearly well bred and cared for. "These aren't just any horses," she observed, momentarily distracted from her grief by the beautiful sight. Quentin's face showed a flash of pride. "No, madam. These are quality stock, taking them to a buyer in Sacramento." He whistled and the horses looked up, several nickering in recognition. A handsome bay stallion trotted toward them, stopping just short to eye Willow suspiciously. "That's Thunderbolt," Quentin said. "He's the reason I'm making this trip. Got blood from the best racing stock back east. The man in California paid a small fortune just on my word he exists." Willow found herself drawn to the animal's proud bearing and intelligent eyes. Without thinking, she extended her hand. The stallion sniffed cautiously, then nudged her palm with his velvet nose. "Well now," Quentin said softly. "That's something. Thunder doesn't take to strangers, especially not women." "My father raised horses," Willow explained, the memory surfacing unexpectedly. "Before he lost everything in the war, I practically grew up in the stables." As she stroked the stallion's neck, something inside her stirred, not happiness, not by any measure, but a faint reminder of who she had been before grief had hollowed her out. Horses had been her first love, long before Thomas. "He needs exercising," Quentin observed. "They all do." "Been penned up too long on the trail." Before Willow could respond, he added casually, "Don't suppose you'd want to help? I could use an extra hand if you know horses." She should have refused, should have continued on her aimless journey toward oblivion. But the thought of being near these magnificent creatures, of losing herself even temporarily in the familiar work of caring for them, was unexpectedly tempting. "Just for today," she said finally. "Then I'll be on my way." Quentin nodded, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Fair enough. The day passed in a blur of activity. Quentin was driving the horses alone, an ambitious undertaking for a single man, and there was much to be done. Willow found herself falling into the familiar rhythms of checking hooves, brushing coats, and monitoring for any signs of injury or distress. The physical labor was exhausting, but it was also the first time since the funerals that her mind had focused on something besides her loss. As the sun began to set, Quentin built a larger fire than the previous nights. "We'll stay here tonight," he announced. "It's a good spot, and the horses could use another day of decent grazing before we hit the mountain passes." Willow knew she should insist on leaving, on continuing whatever journey to nowhere she had started. Instead, she found herself nodding, too tired to argue and strangely reluctant to face the emptiness again so soon. Quentin prepared a more substantial meal than breakfast beans, jerky softened in the cooking liquid, and biscuits from a small sack of provisions. As they ate, he spoke casually about the horses, about his plans to expand his business, about the challenges of the trail ahead. He didn't ask about her past or her plans, and Willow was grateful for that small mercy. As darkness fell completely, he arranged blankets for her beneath the lean-to shelter, insisting she take the more protected space while he slept near the fire. "Why are you being kind to me?" Willow asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could stop it. Quentin paused in his preparations. "My mother raised me to help folks in need," he said simply. "And if our situations were reversed, I'd hope someone would show the same kindness to my sister or my mother. I'm not your responsibility. No, he agreed. You're not. But we're all responsible for each other out here. The wilderness doesn't care much for the niceties of town life. Out here, you help because tomorrow it might be you needing the helping. He didn't mention her obvious despair, or the fact that he'd clearly recognized her intention to let nature take its course. For that small dignity, Willow felt a flicker of gratitude. She slept better that night than she had since before the sickness took her family, exhaustion from the day's physical labor granting her a few hours of dreamless rest. When she woke, Quentin was already up, tending the fire and preparing coffee. "Morning," he greeted her. "Thought we might exercise the horses properly today before moving on. There's a flat stretch beyond that ridge that's perfect for running them." Willow should have said no. Should have gathered her few belongings and continued on her solitary path. Instead, she heard herself saying, "I haven't ridden in years." "Like swimming," Quentin replied with a slight smile. "Body remembers." After breakfast, he saddled both his gelding and the sorrel mare. "This is Penny," he said, patting the mare's flank. "Gentlest horse I've ever owned. She'll take good care of you." The moment Willow settled into the saddle, something shifted inside her. The familiar position, the warmth of the horse beneath her, the slight give and take as Penny adjusted to her weight, it connected her to her past in a way nothing else had since the funerals. Not the happy past with Thomas and the children, but an earlier time when she was just Willow, a girl who loved horses and wide open spaces. They rode out to the flat area Quentin had mentioned, the herd following behind, eager for exercise. For hours, they worked the horses, running them in patterns to maintain discipline while allowing them to burn off excess energy. Willow found herself calling on long, dormant skills, guiding Penny with subtle pressure from her knees and light touches on the reins. At one point, Quentin pulled up alongside her, his face alight with appreciation. "You undersold yourself, Mrs. Anderson. You ride like you were born in the saddle." For the first time in what felt like forever, Willow felt the ghost of a smile touch her lips. "I practically was. My father started me riding before I could walk properly. It shows." He hesitated. "I could use help getting these horses to Sacramento. The pay wouldn't be much, but—" The invitation hung in the air between them. Willow knew he was offering more than employment, he was offering purpose, however temporary. A reason to continue living, at least until the horses reached their destination. "I'll think about it," she said, surprising herself. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Willow found herself talking about Thomas, how they'd met when he came to her father's farm looking for horses. How they'd married despite her father's objections to Thomas's modest prospects as a homesteader. She spoke of their journey west, their dreams of building a life in Nevada territory, the joy of their children's births. Quentin listened without interruption, his face reflecting compassion without pity. When she finally fell silent, he spoke quietly. "My wife died 6 years ago. Childbirth." "The baby too?" Willow looked up, startled by this revelation. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, but the casual gesture couldn't hide the old pain in his eyes. "Thought I'd die too for a while there. Took to drinking. Nearly got myself killed in a brawl in Abilene." He prodded the fire with a stick. "Then one day, I woke up and realized a leaner would have been ashamed of what I'd become." "What changed?" "Horses," he said simply. "An old foreman I used to ride for found me half dead behind a saloon, dragged me back to the ranch and put me to work. Said I could drink myself to death on my own time, but while I was on his payroll, I'd earn my keep." He smiled slightly at the memory. "Horses don't care if you're heartbroken. They need feeding, watering, exercising. Before I knew it, I was living again." Willow stared into the flames, absorbing his words. "I don't know if I want to live again." "I know," he said gently. "But sometimes we keep going out of habit until we figure it out. That offer stands, by the way. Could really use the help with these horses." The next morning, Willow woke to find Quentin already breaking camp, preparing to move the herd. Without discussion, she helped, packing her few belongings and assisting with the horses. When Quentin handed her Penny's reins, a silent question in his eyes, Willow took them. "Just until Sacramento," she said firmly. "I'm not promising anything beyond that." His smile was brief but genuine. "Wouldn't expect you to." The journey west was arduous. They traveled through increasingly mountainous terrain, sometimes making barely 10 miles in a day. The work was constant, keeping the horses together, finding adequate water and grazing, setting up and breaking camp each day. Willow's hands grew calloused, her skin tanned by the sun. Her body, which had seemed so fragile and worthless in her grief, gradually strengthened. At night, they would sit by the fire, talking sometimes, silent others. Quentin never pressed her to discuss her loss, but he listened when she needed to speak of Thomas or the children. In turn, he shared stories of his own life, his childhood in Texas, his years working cattle drives, his dreams of establishing his own horse breeding operation someday. "Why horses?" Willow asked one evening, about 2 weeks into their journey. They had stopped near a small lake, the horses contentedly grazing nearby. Quentin considered the question. "They're honest," he said finally. "A horse never pretends to be something it isn't. A good horse will give you everything it has, ask for little in return except decent treatment." He paused. "And they saved me when nothing else could." Willow understood. The daily routine of caring for the animals had become a lifeline for her too. Each morning brought tasks that needed completing, problems that needed solving. The constant movement, the focus required to manage the herd, it didn't erase her grief, but it created space around it, making it possible to breathe again. One evening, as they crossed into California, Willow found herself studying Quentin as he brushed down Thunderbolt. He was a handsome man, she realized with a start. Not in the refined way that Thomas had been, but in a rugged, capable manner that spoke of strength and reliability. His hands, large and work-roughened, moved with surprising gentleness over the stallion's coat. The observation startled her. She hadn't noticed a man's appearance, hadn't felt even the slightest stirring of interest since Thomas's death. The very idea felt like a betrayal. Abruptly, she stood and walked away from the camp, needing distance. Quentin didn't call after her, giving her the space she needed. Willow found herself at the edge of a small stream, the water gurgling peacefully over smooth stones. She stared at her reflection, barely recognizing the woman looking back. Her face was thinner, more defined, her once pale skin now golden from weeks in the sun. But it was her eyes that had changed the most, still holding sadness, but no longer vacant with despair. "I'm not ready," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure what she wasn't ready for, to feel anything beyond grief. To acknowledge that life continued stubbornly, persistently, even when you wanted it to stop. When she returned to camp, Quentin had prepared their simple dinner but hadn't touched his portion, waiting for her return. The consideration in this small gesture nearly undid her. "You didn't have to wait," she said, taking her seat across the fire from him. "Wasn't raised to eat before a lady," he replied, the slight twitch of his lips betraying his awareness of how incongruous such manners might seem in their current circumstances. The simple normality of the exchange eased something in Willow's chest. Perhaps it was possible to acknowledge Quentin as a man without betraying Thomas's memory. Perhaps it was even necessary if she was to continue this journey back toward living. As they approached Sacramento, Willow found herself increasingly anxious about what would happen when they reached their destination. She had no plans, no destination, no purpose beyond delivering the horses. The thought of returning to the emptiness that had driven her from Carlin was unbearable, but what alternatives did she have? "What will you do after you sell the horses?" she asked Quentin one evening, trying to sound casual. He was silent for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "Been thinking about that," he said finally. "The buyer in Sacramento, Mr. Hollister, has connections, good ones. If these horses impress him like I think they will, could lead to more business. You'd go back east for more horses, maybe." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "Or maybe I'd start breeding my own. Got my eye on some land near the Feather River. Good water, good grazing. Could be a real operation given time." Willow nodded, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest at the thought of Quentin settling somewhere, building a life that wouldn't include her. "What about you?" he asked quietly. "After Sacramento," she looked away. "I don't know, you could." He began, then stopped, clearing his throat. "That is, if you wanted there'd be work, on a horse farm, if someone were to start one." Willow's heart stuttered. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Nash?" "I'm suggesting a partnership," he said carefully. "Your knowledge of horses equals mine. Your eye for confirmation is better. Together, we could build something worthwhile." "A business partnership," she clarified, needing to be certain of his meaning. Quentin set down the stick and met her gaze directly. "For now, I won't pretend I haven't grown to care for you, Willow. But I respect your grief and your need for time." He paused. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, just offering a way forward that might have meaning for both of us." The honesty in his words touched her deeply. Quentin Nash wasn't a man given to flowery speeches or false promises. If he spoke of partnership, of building something together, he meant exactly that. "I'll think about it," she said, and this time, the words held genuine consideration rather than polite evasion. Sacramento bustled with activity, the streets crowded with wagons, carriages, and pedestrians. After weeks on the trail, the noise and commotion were overwhelming to Willow. She stayed close to Quentin as they led the horses through town toward Mr. Hollister's stables on the outskirts. Frederick Hollister proved to be a portly, enthusiastic man with an expert's eye for horseflesh. He circled Thunderbolt with undisguised admiration. "You didn't exaggerate, Nash," he declared. "Finest piece of horse I've seen west of the Mississippi." The negotiations were lengthy but fair. By evening, the deal was concluded, a substantial sum for the entire herd, with particular premium paid for Thunderbolt. As they counted out the money in Hollister's office, the businessman made an unexpected offer. "I've got connections looking for quality stock all over California," he told Quentin. "If you're planning to continue in this line, I could direct substantial business your way." "Actually," Quentin replied, glancing briefly at Willow, "I've been considering setting up a breeding operation. Got my eye on some land up north." Hollister's eyebrows rose. "Breeding, eh? That's a different proposition altogether. Requires capital, expertise, patience." He studied Quentin thoughtfully. "But with the right partner could be profitable, very profitable." "I might have found the right partner," Quentin said quietly, later, at the hotel where Quentin had insisted they stay. "A proper bed after weeks on the trail is not a luxury. It's a necessity," he declared. Willow stood at the window of her modest room, watching the street below. A knock at her door revealed Quentin, freshly shaven and dressed in clean clothes. The transformation was striking without the trail dust and beard. He looked younger, his strong features more defined. "Thought you might like to get a proper meal," he said. "There's a decent restaurant down the street." Over dinner, They discussed Hollister's offer and the possibilities it presented. Quentin spoke of the land he'd mentioned, describing its advantages with obvious enthusiasm. Willow found herself caught up in his vision, offering suggestions about stable design and breeding programs. "Listen to us," she said suddenly, setting down her fork, "planning a future as if you've decided to keep living," Quentin finished gently. "Is that so terrible?" Willow looked away. "It feels like betrayal," she admitted in a low voice. "To make plans, to think about tomorrow, to notice beauty in the world when they're gone." Quentin was silent for a long moment. "After Alina died," he said finally, "I felt guilty the first time I laughed. It was months later, some stupid joke in a saloon. Laughed without thinking, then felt like I'd committed a sin." He leaned forward. "But living isn't betrayal, Willow, nor is finding purpose again, or even, someday, finding love again." His words hung between them, honest and undemanding. "I'm not ready for that," she whispered. "I know." He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "I'm not asking you to be, just asking you to consider that there might be a future worth building, for both of us." The next morning, they met with a lawyer Hollister had recommended to discuss the land purchase. The property, 200 acres with a small existing structure, good water access, and excellent grazing, was available at a fair price, especially with the capital from the horse sale. "If we're really doing this," Willow said as they walked from the lawyer's office, "we need to be clear about terms. A proper business agreement." Quentin nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her practical approach. "Equal partners," he said firmly. "We both bring different skills, but equally valuable ones." "And personal matters?" she asked, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "Separate from business," he replied without hesitation. "Whatever happens or doesn't happen between us won't affect our partnership. You have my word on that." His integrity, his willingness to give her both space and respect, solidified Willow's decision. "Then I think we have an agreement, Mr. Nash." The land exceeded Quentin's descriptions. Situated in a valley with mountains visible in the distance, it featured rolling meadows, a clear stream, and enough wooded areas to provide shelter and building materials. The existing structure, a sturdy if simple 4-room cabin, would need work, but was immediately habitable. Previous owner started with big dreams but got gold fever, the lawyer explained as he handed over the deed. Left good bones, though. In the weeks that followed, Willow threw herself into transforming the property into a working horse farm. She and Quentin worked from dawn till dusk, repairing the cabin, building stables, and fencing paddocks. Hollister sent word of several promising breeding mares available in nearby Sonoma, and soon the empty stables began to fill. They settled into a routine that was exhausting but fulfilling. Quentin took the smaller bedroom in the cabin, insisting Willow have the larger one. They shared cooking duties and ate their meals together, discussing the day's work and plans for the farm. Gradually, imperceptibly, Willow's grief began to transform. It didn't diminish. She still woke sometimes with tears on her cheeks, still found herself reaching for Thomas in the night, still ached with emptiness when she thought of her children. But the grief no longer defined her entire existence. It became a part of her rather than the whole. She began to notice other things. The satisfaction of watching a foal take its first wobbling steps, the simple pleasure of a meal shared after a day of hard work, the beauty of sunset over their valley. And increasingly, she found herself noticing Quentin, his quiet strength, his unfailing consideration, the rare but transformative smile that lit his entire face. One evening in early spring, nearly 6 months after they had established the farm, Willow found Quentin on the porch, staring out at a new paddock they had just completed. "Thinking about expanding again?" she asked, handing him a cup of coffee and settling into the chair beside his. "Actually," he said, "I was thinking about Thomas." Startled, Willow nearly spilled her coffee. "What? You mentioned once that he had a good eye for land. Said he chose your homestead in Nevada because he could see what it would become, not just what it was." Quentin gestured toward their property. Made me wonder what he'd think of all this. The question should have been painful, perhaps even offensive. Instead, Willow found herself genuinely considering it, picturing Thomas's reaction to what she and Quentin had built. "He would have approved," she said slowly. "He always wanted me to have horses again. Used to promise that once the farm was established, he'd get me a proper riding horse." The memory brought sadness, but not the crushing despair of months ago. Quentin nodded. "Sounds like he wanted your happiness above all." "He did." Willow took a sip of coffee, gathering courage. "Quentin, I've been thinking about us." He turned to her, his expression carefully neutral. "Oh, these months we've worked together. They've meant a great deal to me." She set her cup down, her hands suddenly unsteady. "You gave me purpose when I had none, a reason to keep going. I can never repay that." "Nothing to repay," he said quietly. "Wasn't charity, Willow. This partnership has benefited me as much as you." "It's more than a partnership to me now," she admitted, the words releasing something tight in her chest. "I care for you, deeply." Quentin was very still, his eyes never leaving her face. "Are you sure you're ready? I don't want you to feel obligated or rushed." "I'll always love Thomas," she said honestly. "Always grieve for my children. That won't change, but my heart, it seems, has room for more than just memory." She reached out, taking his hand for the first time. "If you're patient with me, I'd like to see what might grow between us." His fingers tightened around hers. "I've got nothing but patience, Willow, and hope." Their first kiss came a week later, gentle and tentative, both of them cautious of the fragile new connection between them. Quentin was unfailingly respectful of her boundaries, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. In turn, Willow found herself opening to him, sharing more of her past, her dreams, her fears. As spring turned to summer, their relationship deepened alongside the growing success of their horse breeding business. Hollister's connections proved invaluable, bringing buyers from as far as San Francisco. Their reputation for quality stock spread, and with it came financial security neither had anticipated so quickly. "We should expand the house," Quentin suggested one evening as they reviewed their accounts. "Add a proper office at least, maybe another bedroom or two." Willow looked up sharply at the implication. "Planning for the future, Mr. Nash." His gaze was steady, unembellished with unnecessary words. "Always." That night, for the first time, Willow invited him into her bedroom. Their lovemaking was tender, each movement a question and answer between them. Afterward, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Willow felt not the betrayal she had feared, but a profound sense of continuing of life insisting on its renewal. "I love you," Quentin whispered against her hair. "Have for a long time now." Willow placed her hand over his heart, feeling its steady rhythm. "I love you too," she said, the words both a revelation and a recognition of something long growing between them. In the autumn, they married in a simple ceremony attended by a few business associates and neighbors. Willow wore a new dress of deep blue silk, her hair adorned with wildflowers from their land. Quentin, uncharacteristically nervous, stumbled slightly over his vows but spoke them with unmistakable conviction. That winter, they expanded the house as planned, adding not just an office but 3 additional bedrooms. "Optimistic," Willow teased, though the possibility of children, a family rebuilt from the ashes of her loss, no longer seemed impossible to contemplate. Their first child, a son they named James Thomas Nash, was born the following summer. As Willow held him for the first time, she felt both overwhelming joy and a bittersweet ache for the children she had lost. Quentin, understanding without words, sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "He would have liked you," Willow said softly, glancing up at her husband. "Thomas, I mean. Would have approved of the man raising his wife's children." Quentin pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'll do my best to be worthy of that approval." As James grew from infant to toddler, the Nash horse breeding operation expanded as well. They purchased additional land, built more stables, hired workers. Thunderbolt's offspring became known throughout California and beyond for their speed and endurance. Willow developed a particular talent for matching breeding pairs, her intuitive understanding of bloodlines producing exceptional results. Their second child, a daughter named Alina Mee after both Quentin's first wife and Willow's mother, arrived 2 years after James. She was followed 18 months later by William, a sturdy boy with Quentin's dark hair and Willow's determined spirit. Life settled into a rhythm of growth and prosperity. The farm became known as Nash Valley Thoroughbreds, its brand a mark of quality sought by buyers throughout the West. Quentin and Willow worked side by side, their partnership in business as strong as their marriage. There were difficulties, of course. Droughts that threatened their water supply. A fire that destroyed one of the smaller stables. The inevitable conflicts that arise between two strong-willed people building a life together. But through it all, they persevered, their shared vision and deepening love carrying them forward. On the 5th anniversary of their meeting that fateful morning when Quentin had found Willow beneath the juniper tree, he presented her with a special gift. It was a locket, gold and intricately worked, large enough to hold 4 small portraits. "Open it," he urged. Inside, Willow found miniature paintings. Thomas, looking strong and vital as she remembered him, her 2 lost children, their images created from her descriptions, and on the 4th panel, Quentin himself. Tears filled her eyes as she looked up at him. "How did you?" "Found an artist in San Francisco who specializes in memorial portraits," he explained. "Wanted you to have a way to keep them with you always." He touched the locket gently. "All the loves of your life together." The thoughtfulness of the gift, his recognition that her first family would always hold a place in her heart, and his complete acceptance of that fact moved Willow deeply. "You saved me," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "When I had lost everything, when I had no hope left, you gave me a reason to keep living." Quentin shook his head. "You saved yourself, Willow. I just provided a horse and some company along the way." She smiled through her tears. "Then thank you for the horse. And for being patient enough to wait until I was ready to live again." That evening, as they sat on their expanded porch watching their children play in the yard, Thunderbolt grazing contentedly in the nearby paddock, Willow felt a sense of completeness she had once thought impossible. Her grief remained, a quiet undercurrent beneath the joy of her present life. But it no longer threatened to drown her. Instead, it had become part of the rich tapestry of her existence, threads of sorrow interwoven with threads of joy, creating a pattern more beautiful for its complexity. "Penny for your thoughts," Quentin said, his hand finding hers in the gathering dusk. Willow leaned against his shoulder, watching as James helped little Alina climb onto a gentle pony, William clapping his hands in excitement as he waited his turn. "I was thinking about journeys," she said. "How sometimes they end where you never expected to go." She squeezed his hand. "And how grateful I am for this particular destination." As the sun set over Nash Valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Willow Anderson Nash held tightly to her husband's hand, embracing not just the man beside her, but the life they had built together, a life rescued from despair, nurtured with patience and understanding, and ultimately transformed into something neither of them could have imagined that morning beneath the juniper tree. In the years that followed, Nash Valley Thoroughbreds became one of the most respected horse breeding operations on the West Coast. Their reputation drew buyers from across the country and even from Europe. The small cabin grew into a sprawling ranch house, the original rooms preserved at Willow's insistence as a reminder of their beginnings. Their children thrived, James following his parents into the horse business with a particular talent for training, Alina developing her mother's eye for breeding pairs, and William showing an unexpected aptitude for the business side of the operation. 2 more children joined the family, twins Rebecca and Robert, born when Willow was 35, completing their family circle. On quiet evenings, Willow would sometimes open the locket Quentin had given her, sharing stories of Thomas and her first children with their growing family. Quentin always encouraged these moments, understanding that honoring her past strengthened rather than threatened their present happiness. "Love multiplies," he would tell the children. "It doesn't divide. Your mother has enough for all of us, past and present." As they entered their later years, with grandchildren beginning to fill the ranch house with noise and energy, Willow often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this unexpected happiness. The desperate woman who had walked away from Carlin with no destination seemed like someone from a different lifetime connected to her present self by the slender thread of survival that Quentin had helped her grasp. "Do you ever wonder," she asked him one evening as they watched the sunset from the same porch where they had sat for decades, "what would have happened if you hadn't found me that morning?" Quentin, his dark hair now streaked with silver but his eyes still clear and direct, considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I prefer to think it wasn't chance at all, but something more deliberate in the workings of the world." Willow leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence as she had for 30 years. "However it happened, I'm grateful. For every day, every moment. For the family we've built. For the love we've shared." "As am I," he replied simply, pressing a kiss to her temple. Together they watched the sun sink below the horizon, their hands intertwined, their hearts still finding new ways to expand after all these years. The journey that had begun in grief had led to a life richer and fuller than either could have imagined, proof that even in the darkest moments, when all hope seems lost, the possibility of joy remains, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to keep living.